Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're taking a really fascinating, highly focused look at the actual mechanics of real estate finance. Specifically, we're going to completely demystify temporary seller financing. Now, if you've ever found yourself wondering, is there a more strategic way to sell my property? Something that goes way beyond that traditional, sometimes incredibly rigid banking route? Well, you are exactly in the right place. By the end of this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this mechanism works, the actual tangible benefits it offers to you as a property owner, and, probably most importantly, the structural safeguards that are built right into the process.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our quick roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the ideal candidate. Then, the properties and the note investors. After that, we'll cover the role of specialists, dig into the safety and logistics, and finally, we'll wrap up with the balloon payment contingency.
All right, Section 1, the ideal candidate. Who is this strategy really built for?
So, you might be thinking, if this alternative strategy is really so beneficial, why doesn't literally everyone use temporary seller financing and just put traditional banks out of business, right? I mean, it's totally fair skepticism. The short answer? It comes down to the highly specific conditions that are required to actually make this work. It's not a magic wand for everyone.
And here is that absolute foundational rule, straight from our source material. Temporary seller financing works best on properties that are owned free and clear. Seriously, this strategy is just not built for properties that are heavily bogged down by existing mortgages. You really need that clean slate of ownership for the seller to successfully step into the role of the financier. That's your absolute baseline requirement. So let's break this down a bit more. If you're a seller who needs every single penny of your cash immediately at closing, maybe you got to go buy another house outright, or you need to pay off a massive mountain of debt, this is strictly not for you. Do not pass go. However, this strategy is an absolutely excellent fit for sellers who want a nice lump sum right out of the gate, but also want to establish a steady stream of future cash flow. It's literally built for folks aiming to secure a premium price for their property, or for sellers who are looking at marginal buyers where, a creative financing solution is the exact missing puzzle piece needed to get the deal across the finish line. Moving right along to Section 2, Properties and Note Investors, the ecosystem of temporary seller financing. Now, a really common misconception in alternative real estate financing is that it's strictly a residential play. So people always ask, does temporary seller financing only work with single-family homes? I mean, it's super easy to assume this is just for mom-and-pop sellers financing a starter home, right? But the reality actually challenges that assumption completely. The scope here is surprisingly wide. Yes, for sure, it absolutely works for single-family homes, but it also seamlessly applies to commercial properties, to the sale of entire businesses, multi-family apartment buildings, and even just raw land. As long as you meet that earlier criteria of owning the asset free and clear, this financing mechanism can be applied across virtually the entire real estate spectrum. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so once a seller actually finances a property and holds a note, who are the investors who actually step in to buy these notes and hand the seller their cash? It's crucial we pull back the curtain and demystify who exactly is providing the liquidity in this whole ecosystem. Basically, these liquidity providers fall into two very distinct camps. On one side, we have individual investors, private individuals who just prefer deploying their hard-earned capital into tangible, physical real estate assets rather than riding the crazy roller coaster of the stock market. And on the flip side, we have large institutional investors. These are massive entities that buy up existing loans and mortgages in bulk. But what's deeply fascinating about these institutional buyers is their flexibility. They can get remarkably creative, and a lot of times they're willing to buy specific fractional parts of a mortgage, depending entirely on exactly what the seller wants to liquidate. Which brings us to Section 3, the role of specialists, navigating the mechanics. Can I use temporary seller financing without working with a specialist? Look, it's a completely fair question, especially if you're an experienced, do-it-yourself kind of property owner. But while technically, yes, you could, our source strongly recommends against flying solo from your kitchen table on this one. And here's exactly why they recommend bringing a specialist on board. First off, a good specialist more than earns their keep by exposing your property to a significantly larger pool of potential homebuyers than you could literally ever reach on your own. Second, alternative financing involves incredibly complex paperwork and some really highly specific legal disclosures. Unless you read real estate law for fun on a Friday night, you definitely want an expert handling that heavy lifting. And most importantly, they help you avoid incredibly costly mistakes. A specialist really acts as your ultimate risk mitigation tool. All right, Section 4, Safety and Logistics, protecting the transaction.
How do I know that my note will actually be bought? And just how safe is this entire process? Let's lean into that skepticism for a second, because you should absolutely not hand over the keys to a valuable asset without knowing exactly how your financial exposure is structurally protected. No way!
So the crucial takeaway here is that this process relies on traditional, totally ironclad safeguards. Let's walk right through them. First, all transactions are handled safely through a neutral third-party escrow company. Standard stuff. Second, every single deal includes a real title insurance policy. Third, and this is big, you aren't just left sitting around hoping someone eventually buys your paper. The sale of your note is actually prearranged the exact moment the home seller decides on their potential buyer. And finally, there's just tremendous flexibility. You actually have the option to hold the note for a few payments and then sell it for potentially even more cash later on. You remain completely in the driver's seat. To really anchor this segment on safety, let's look at a direct quote from the source material regarding the entities facilitating all this. Every transaction that Nationwide Real Estate Acquisitions LLC participates in is structured to be transparent and protects all parties involved in the transaction. The whole overarching fundamental goal here is to provide a perfectly safe, strictly legal method to help sellers quickly secure top dollar with absolutely total transparency.
And finally, Section 5, the balloon payment contingency. Addressing the big what if.
Now, this is the exact scenario that keeps people up at night. What happens if the balloon payment comes due and the homebuyer simply cannot secure traditional refinancing to pay off the note? I mean, it's a massive what if, right? Any viable financing strategy has to have a structural answer to prevent immediate catastrophe. And this right here brilliantly illustrates the built-in safety nets designed to prevent an immediate, messy default. Step 1, the homebuyer actually has the option to simply sell the home themselves on the open market to pay off that balloon balance. But let's say the market is slow and they can't immediately sell. Step 2, the buyer can request a formal 6-month extension in order to pay off the balloon. The whole process is intentionally designed with breathing room. It protects the seller's initial asset while giving the buyer a very realistic, highly structured off-ramp.
Which brings us to the very end of our explainer, and it leaves us with a rather provocative question to ponder. Knowing all about these robust structural safeguards, the vast flexibility across all sorts of asset classes, and the real potential to command premium pricing, is it time to fundamentally rethink how you structure a real estate transaction? Temporary seller financing clearly offers an incredibly powerful, entirely viable alternative to traditional banking for the right seller with the exact right property. Thank you so much for joining me today to break this all down. Keep asking those great questions, and I will see you on the next explainer.